Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and throughout America there are wonderful congregational rabbis, inspiring their synagogue communities to become more active and more committed, more engaged in Jewish life, the Jewish tradition, and in support of and love of the State of Israel. Wonderful congregational rabbis throughout the country, men and women rabbis, and cantors and educators, Jewish professionals, whom we look to for knowledge and Jewish energy. And by the way, not every Jew feels this way about their rabbi. Like any other profession, there are some rabbis who are less gifted. And sometimes people complain to me about their rabbi. But I'm finding more and more often people tell me how wonderful their rabbi is. And kol hakavod to those rabbis who are making a profound, positive difference in the lives of their synagogue communities. And on this edition of L'Chaim, I have the great pleasure to introduce you to one such rabbi whose entire career has been marked by the enormous good he has done everywhere he served, both in America and abroad. I am so pleased to welcome Rabbi Robert Wolkoff, who's currently serving the conservative congregation in North Brunswick, New Jersey, B'nai Tikvah, a position he's held since 2007. For the preceding 12 years, Robert Wolkoff served Congregation Agudath Achim in Savannah, Georgia. And before that, and for a decade, Robert served as the rabbi of the Jewish community of Gothenburg, Sweden. And while in Sweden, Robert founded an organization called Blackfire, devoted to raising the public profile of the Jews of Scandinavia while defending the Jewish community from governmental, academic, and theological anti-Semitism. Robert has many passions and interests that seem to flow out of his Jewish commitment. He received his smicha, his rabbinic ordination, from JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York City, which of course is the conservative movement's rabbinical school. And his impressive scholarship spans many areas of Jewish learning and of social issues, having published and lectured internationally on religion, politics, and moral concerns. And Robert, it's an honor to have you sitting at this table. Thank you for joining us on L'Chaim.
Thank you. What a sweet introduction.
I'm so much wanted to have you at this table. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
But what a fascinating background you have. I want you to tell our audience, tell me, what moved you to become a rabbi? At what point in your life do you make this decision? What was the motivation?
This was back in 1970. It was the May of 1970. I had gone to college expecting to go into nuclear physics.
Really?
Yeah.
And this is Wesleyan, yes?
Yes, a Wesleyan. And the first week there was a Jewish meet and greet. And it was going to be a conversation between a Judaica professor, Jeremy Zwelling, and a nuclear physicist, a Jewish nuclear physicist. And I figured, I'm home free. This is going to be great. So I went, got some, free bagel and was able to listen to this. I heard the nuclear physicist, most brilliant guy I'd ever heard in my life. Fantastic. I said, this is my career. Here I am. And then Jeremy Zwelling started to speak, professor of Judaica, expert in mysticism. And he absolutely blew me away. Absolutely blew me away.
In what way?
The reason was I had always had a positive view about Judaism. I was proud to be Jewish, not particularly religious in any conscious way. It was a typical Jewish home where my mother was a member of Hadassah, we were members of the JCC. Every year my father would count the Jewish Nobel Prize winners. That was an annual ritual. But
conservative movement?
Conservative movement. And so I would do the youth groups and the sort of normal routine, but I wasn't in any way actively engaged in it. I did what everybody else did. And I always thought Judaism was a nice religion, a democratic party with holidays. And that you had, the rabbi would always come with these great moral one-liners. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? The standard operating procedure. And I was very happy with that, proud to be a part of it, certainly proud of Israel, not passionate about it, just proud of it. I had no idea that Judaism had the kind of intellectual depth that it did. It caught me entirely by surprise. So as soon as I heard this, I switched my major. It was my first week in college. Forget the physics, started taking religion courses. And by that summer, this was the summer of 1970, so it was Kent State. The week after Kent State, I went to 770 to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Did you?
I was on an archaeological dig in Israel, in Beersheba. And all of that happened at the same time.
Okay, and what motivates you to go see the Rebbe?
As part of the Judaica study, another one of my teachers was Rabbi Yossi Sobelman, who was the university rabbi at that time. Zichrono
Did
Livracha.
the meeting, the Rebbe, have any impact on you?
Oh, absolutely.
Describe it.
Simply the power of the man, the sense that he was an intellect that was above, head and shoulders above almost everybody else, and that he could evoke that kind of passion from his followers. Then there was a Grateful Dead concert. I'm a Deadhead. So that all happened all at the same time. And I really had to make a choice about whether I was going to pursue the political or whether I was going to pursue the spiritual. And I chose to move in the spiritual rather than the political.
Okay. That begins to shape your personality and your interest. But why rabbinical school?
A very tough discussion with Jeremy Zwelling. Because I was speaking to him about it. His father was a congregational rabbi. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, his brother was a congregational rabbi as well. And what he said to me was that that's the hard path. Being a university professor is the easy path. There you rely on your scholarship and you're done. Going into congregations, that's the front line. That's really the battle zone. And I had to remake that choice because I went to the seminary originally simply because that was the place at that time where if you wanted Jewish scholarship, that's where you had to go. You didn't have huge Judaica faculties at other universities in 1970. So today I might have made a different choice. But back then, if you wanted top of the line, that's where you went.
Is it fair for me to say that as you study at JTS, you fall even more in love with the Jewish tradition as a whole, and when you're in Israel, you fall even more in love with Israel as a whole?
Certainly the last part is true. Being in Israel really stimulated that. When I was going to JTS, it was a more complicated time.
That's very honest. Tell us how.
Well, there was this ongoing tension between the great scholars that were teaching there, who lived in a world of superior Talmudic intellect, and the rabbis who were actually going out into the field, where we needed the practical skills to how do you work with a congregation that may not know anything at all about this.
There are many professional schools. In essence, when a rabbi studies to become a rabbi for smicha or ordination, he in part is being professionally trained. It's a professional school.
Right.
There are many professional schools in many disciplines of life where the students who graduate complain that the orientation of the professors is a white tower mentality that doesn't really relate to on-the-ground experience, out in the real world. You're learning things in theory that really have nothing to do with the day-to-day life. I hear the same thing from rabbis, that very often.
Sure.
This does not mean that what we were taught in rabbinical school is meaningless, but it does mean that there's a disconnect inside the school. So when you talk about the fact that you are going to a JTS, a place of extraordinary scholarship, but it doesn't mean that the people who were training you were training you understanding who were going to be sitting in your congregations, whether it was in Savannah, whether it was in Sweden, or whether it was in New Jersey.
That's right. it's not only that from a purely practical point of view, the mechanics of how do you deal with a board where people have disagreements.
No, I'm not talking about that.
The spiritual life.
Right.
That element was missing as well. The
Yes.
personal spiritual quest, because I really believe that if you can be on a personal spiritual quest, if your congregation knows that you are on a personal spiritual quest, that you remain fascinated by learning and experience and greater theological depth, that they may not go on that trip with you, but they will sense the holiness of what you're doing. They'll sense that there's something more going on here than simply, the social interplay between an administrator and a board. That there's something about this holy congregation that we have that makes people want to be a part of it. They want to participate in their own way, not necessarily in the path of the rabbi, but knowing that there's a path for them as well. I think it's a crucial thing, and we lost that. We lost that sense.
The other thing that always concerned me was there was a sense that the rabbinical school wanted to be more authentically halachic in terms of Jewish law, meaning more observant than the congregant that we would be serving.
Sure.
Most congregants have very little understanding of or connection to halakha. And so there was something unrealistic about the approach that was given in rabbinical school. And then the wise rabbi doesn't discard the learning, just adapts and understands to be very patient with and tolerant of Jews who are searching. Now, I want to come back to the word search, this quest. I want to see if we mean the same thing. What's your level of sureness? How sure are you of whatever you do or do not believe?
That's a great question. How sure am I?
How sure are you that there is a God?
I would say 99 point. I'd say 100%. I'd say 100%. I have no doubt about it. I have no doubt about it.
What's your attitude to conversations with Jews and they say to you, I'm not sure?
Well, after the Holocaust, how can you be sure?
Well, you are.
Yeah, I understand that.
So
but
after the Holocaust, how can you be sure?
Well, because I've seen too much of the good on the other side.
So why isn't that true for everybody?
Because they can be overwhelmed. They might not have noticed. Hakarat hatov is a talent. Being able to recognize the good is not an inborn skill. It's something that needs to be nurtured. Recognizing evil, that's easier.
Okay. You think it's appropriate to blame God for the Holocaust?
I don't think so. I don't think so. There are too many people involved in that process.
But you have no doubt, huh?
I have no doubt. Not about that. Not about that. It's. I
Are you
wouldn't have necessarily said that years ago, but I've just been living in that realm of mythic adventure for too long.
My own sense is that the Jewish tradition is very much encouraging and understanding that the kind of relationship the Jew ultimately has with God isn't something that is done or, as one person, one very wise man said to me, it's not like you get a diploma that you put on your wall. I now believe in God.
Right.
That this is a living process, and that there are moments when one can really feel the Shekhinah at one's right hand and be sure for a moment. What Maimonides describes as that flash of lightning. It's no longer than a flash of lightning, but for one moment,
It's there.
you see everything, and then it's dark again. And the question that Maimonides raises is, how do you live between those flashes?
Right.
And I think Judaism is extraordinarily embracing of the Jew who struggles between those moments of lightning.
Sure.
And is never critical of the searching Jew.
No, not at all.
And therefore, I am surprised that you would say 100%,
Yeah.
as opposed to Mark, I'm on a quest and I'm always searching, and there are days when I feel absolutely sure, and there are days when I have my doubts. And by the way, for me, the stupidest thing a person can be is an atheist. To know that there's no God, to me, that's just a non-thinking, non-observer. It's just stupid. But for somebody to say, I am sure, I don't understand that person either. I find that the Jewish tradition's stroke is, the genius of it is, you are struggling all the time, and the question is, will you act kivyachol? Will you act as if there's a God, even when you're not sure? That's my own perspective. You know, you seem to have a different one.
Yeah. Because I'm no longer dealing with the issue of whether God exists. That part I'm sure about. Everything else I'm not sure about.
Whether God intervenes, you're not sure.
How God intervenes.
Whether God intervenes.
That I'm pretty sure God does.
Where does this come from? By the way,
we're free. We're not in Egypt.
By the way,
Israel's
I'm
been
not so
reestablished.
sure that's true. And I'm not so sure on our high holidays. You wouldn't say there's still a lot of Egypt all around us?
There's a lot of Egypt in us.
Okay, I don't think you mean that.
No.
That's too facile. I will not let you be facile, Robert.
It was easier to take the Jews out of Egypt than it is to take the Egypt out of the Jews. That's what I deal with on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
But wait, who took us out of Egypt?
Well, I definitely believe. Here, let me give you close to a proof.
A proof? No,
close to a proof. Wait, close to a proof. Listen to me. Just listen to me. Listen to me for 1 second.
Proof?
No, listen to me for a second.
Okay.
I'm in Israel. It's Passover 1977. And I'm visiting a friend of mine, Tzvika Yacobi, Zichrono Livracha, who is a member of that kibbutz. And I was there for the Passover Seder. Now, this was not a, quote, not a religious kibbutz, which just tells you how much we need to redefine what religion means in Israel. But this is a, quote, non-religious kibbutz. So they have their own Haggadah. They don't use the traditional Haggadah that we use often in America. And during this service, at one point, there are these two girls that get up and says that Moses said to Pharaoh, let my people go. And everybody in the room, the 2,000 people in the room, everybody starts to cry. So I look at my friend Tzvika and I say, what's going on? He tells me the following story. These two girls who were roughly 11 and 9, they come from the Soviet Union of not blessed memory. Their parents had gotten an exit visa. They come to the airport, they get on the plane, the KGB comes onto the plane and says to the parents, you can't go. The parents leave the kids on the plane. The parents get off the plane, but they leave the kids. The kids come out to the West. You can imagine what it's like for these two kids who were maybe 5 and 7 or 7 and 9, coming out, their parents being taken off on the plane and they're landing. You can imagine how hysterical they were. They come to Israel, they're adopted by the kibbutz. Okay. So they get up. This is the spring of 1977. And they get up and said, Moses said to Pharaoh, let my people go. Okay. 10 years almost to the day later, the Berlin Wall falls. All right. Now, Mark, take every single foreign policy pundit on the planet, and you ask them in the spring of 1977, if 10 years from now, the Soviet Union is going to collapse and the Jews are going to be able to come out of the Soviet Union and be free, not one person in that room would have said yes. Not one. All right. But that's exactly what happened. So who's stronger? All right, the KGB or these two little kids that are standing there in front of that kibbutz and the spirit that they represent? If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. And it happened in our time. We saw it with our eyes. Not everybody realizes it's a miracle. Because there's Soros, UJA, you need the money, who's going to pay for it, there's the integration problems, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of song and dance. It was a miracle that we saw in our time. Yeah. To me, absolute proof of God.
Okay. The one thing is very important for me to say, it doesn't matter whether you and I agree.
Right.
It's interesting for the audience to get to know you and for me to get to know you. I experience life very differently than you do.
Mm-hmm.
My commitment to Judaism is expressed very differently than you do. I don't,
Tell me more.
No, I mean, for me, I try, and I think you speak for and to many people who are watching right now. I think you also are a mystery that to many who are watching right now who would say, I don't understand what kind of Judaism this man represents. Mm-hmm. But one thing I think is clear, you have such a lovely, and I mean, it's not patronizing. You are I believe if I was a member of your congregation,
Halavai.
I wouldn't care whether you and I agreed philosophically on how does God intervene or not. I wouldn't care. It's your loveliness, and what you want of rabbis is that they be lovely and that they don't exclude anybody who disagrees with them.
Right.
Also, it's not that I don't find that story extraordinarily moving. Mm-hmm. I don't draw the same conclusion you do. And I'm committed to for me, I'm committed, the audience knows this, I've said it so many times, I'm committed to the Jewish model of Nachshon. Mm-hmm. And that this Red Sea does not split until Nachshon goes forward. Mm-hmm. And the Jew does not wait on the banks of the Red Sea for God to make a miracle.
Right.
And if a miracle was made when this Berlin Wall came down, God didn't do it. But maybe people in response to God did it. And that's very different than the
How do you tell?
You can't tell. Well,
these are the hands of God.
What? Sorry?
These are the hands of God.
Yes, but if you say that, you're saying something very different than a supernatural miracle in which people are basically passively experiencing an intervention.
Okay.
And it's interesting also for me, what is so often forgotten, you and I know that in the Jewish tradition, the enslavement in Egypt was for how long? 400 years.
Call it 400, 210.
Okay,
lots.
so for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Okay, they were enslaved. The Midrash tells us 200 children were thrown into the Nile River and drowned every single day after the Pharaoh's decree. I have never counted what the total number is. World War II went from 39 to 45. Okay. It didn't go for 10 years, didn't go for 100 years, didn't go for 400 years.
6 was enough.
That's correct. 6 was enough. Yet, nobody says, I don't believe in God because we were enslaved for 400 years. And yet they'll say, I don't believe in God because there was a Holocaust. And I want rabbis to answer. I want rabbis to say, God didn't do it for 400 years. God didn't do it for 6 years. God doesn't work that way. In the Jewish tradition, human beings, in response to God, have to end evil everywhere they see it. And the Jew is obsessed that he will free every slave, Jew and non-Jew alike, of every form of enslavement, physical, emotional, economic, sexual. And God is at our right hand, but God will never do it. Never do anything to us or for us. And I believe that the Jewish tradition teaches this in a profoundly overwhelming way. So it's in that sense that I intellectually disagree with you. But in terms of the soul, you have me 100%, Robert.
Okay. Well, Mark, let me just make one small, because I don't want to be misunderstood. Because I agree completely, and it pains me when I see our weakening in this regard. I agree completely that we have this massive responsibility to be the leaders, the champions of the fight for freedom. And it kills me when I see us weakening, whether it's because we've become more bourgeois or whether we've been atomized into our own little, computer screens and Instagram or whatever it is that we're doing. And there is an awful lot of wishful thinking going on around out there. There's an enormous amount of wishful thinking. Let me mention just one example of the wishful thinking. All right. It is true that there are all kinds of interesting things that are being done by sort of independent groups, independent minyanim, and Heb, and various kinds of, there are a lot of Jewish rock musicians that are all kinds of fascinating, and I love it and I embrace all of that. Anybody who thinks that that's going to be a reasonable substitute for organized Jewish life is out of their mind. All right? It's wonderful, it's entertaining, Gegesunder hate, enjoy it, do it, the more the merrier. But if you think of that as a substitute for a life of synagogues, of prayer, of study, that is absolute fantasy land. All right, that's number one. What I think the problem is the following. I think that during the time that I was growing up, from the 1950s well up into the 80s, 90s, American Judaism focused in on saving somebody. We were going to save the Israelis. We were going to save Soviet Jewry. We were going to save Syrian Jewry. We were going to save the Ethiopians. We were going to save Jews from anti-Semitism. We were going to save the memory of the Holocaust. All right, we're saving all over the place. All of these are great and holy things, no question about it. But they substituted for our spiritual life. What do I need to learn a Mishnah for? I'm saving Soviet Jewry. What do I need to do Shabbos for? I support Israel. I know that we have things out there like BDS and so forth, but the fact of the matter is that Jews are better off today than we have been for at least 2,000 years and possibly ever. We have more comfort, we have more power, we have more safety, we have more security than we ever had. We saved ourselves really well. And before the saving, it was becoming an American. As you well know, JTS was started by Reform Jews to get traditional rabbis, to get people coming off the boat to become American. We've succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. So that was mission number one, accomplished. Mission number two, save somebody, accomplished. Now we come back to, okay, so here we are, we're all free, we're all saved. What are you going to do now? And I go back to, let my people go. The next word is, so that they can serve me, says God. Right? That's the part that we left out of the discussion. And so now what we need to do is we need to refocus on that world of spirituality. How am I going to live my Jewish spiritual life? Oh, Rabbi, there's a Jewish spiritual life? Who knew? I thought we were just like one tzedakah campaign after another. You want me to do something spiritual? Like what? It comes as a shock and surprise. And it's sort of like, the story about the aircraft carrier that when you want to turn one around, after you turn it around, it still goes 3 miles in the wrong direction because it's just so big. All right? So Judaism has been going in this direction, and now we want to turn it around. And to some extent we have, because when you think about the literature, Jewish Lights Publishing, and this array of spirituality books, trust me, when I was going to rabbinical school, I'm sure when you were going to rabbinical school, you couldn't find any books about Jewish spirituality. Now it's hard not to. Right? There are there's a whole Jewish renewal movement. There are spiritual direction training programs. There's institutes for spirituality and the Hartman Institute and all kinds of places where rabbis and lay people can go and get their spiritual batteries renewed. And there's a tremendous, and certainly the whole array of music and culture that are providing pathways for people and entranceways for people. The problem is we've gone so far that we've got an entire generation that is alienated from Judaism. When I say alienated, not in a position of opposition to it, but ignorance about it and distance from it. Now, things can change. All right, 500,000 Jews have now gone on birthright. So they've gone to Israel, they've looked around, they said, wow, Jewish cultural creativity, there's something powerful about that. That hasn't been capitalized on yet, but it may make a difference for the future. People have heard the musicians. They've seen the Art Greens of the world and the J. Michelsons of the world, and they've been moved by what they've seen. And they've read these books. They're questioning what the depth of their spiritual life should look like beyond the social action. Not that social action, God forbid, isn't important. Social action is absolutely, it's 100% moral demand. But that's not the whole story. That's half of the story. And let me just say one thing. If we continue not to have the other, if we continue not to have that deep spiritual life and that deep quest, we're not going to be doing the social action anymore either.
I want you to help our audience understand what you mean when you use the word spiritual. What, for the Jew who isn't there already, and we hear you talk about the spiritual side of Judaism, what are you referring to?
Okay. I truly believe that God plays a role in our lives, that we have been put on this earth. As a matter of fact, that the earth is here at all, which is also rather miraculous, that we are here because we have a mission. We are supposed to create something. We are supposed to be able to create a moral society. And we are supposed to have contact with divine knowledge. That's what we're supposed to do. In the center of the Garden of Eden, there was a tree of knowledge. We ate from it prematurely, but it's there. That's what our garden is supposed to look like. And we have not been pursuing that. We do whatever politics we do. We do
Learning,
whatever socials do.
The quest for knowledge?
Well, it's knowledge of a particular sort. I mean, knowledge in general is wonderful. But knowledge that is going to drive me to seek a higher moral level, a higher consciousness of the presence of God, a higher sense of the demands that God is making on me right now, a higher awareness of what it is that I have around me. Mindfulness is the common term for it these days. To be mindful of what's here. Our tradition tells us we're supposed to say 100 blessings every day. Why? Why? Is it just so we can have our little checklist and go and say, oh yeah, I did my 100 blessings today, I'm done? Or is it because we're supposed to, every 10 minutes of our life, be aware that God is right there in front of us?
I don't think so.
Well,
I don't think so.
Okay, I think that's certainly the reason.
And it's interesting, we've come back to the discussion we had a moment ago.
Okay.
I believe that the Jewish tradition was created by human beings as a response, a community's response to whatever the divine is in this universe. I think you and I think we might disagree about whether the specific content of any biblical verse or of any specific mitzvah is literally an articulation of something God said, or in Hegelian sense, is it man's hearing in man's way, and then man's articulating what the Jew understands would be in consonance with, in harmony with, whatever is the most human and lovely in the universe. But I believe that we're supposed to say 100 blessings every day because it makes us aware of ourselves and our life, and creates a certain sense of humility and gratitude, and it makes life richer and more exciting. And when you say Modeh Ani in the morning, that you're grateful for another day, that it's not necessarily about God. That if one understands the Jewish tradition's drive for you is that don't take life for granted. And we won't worry right now whether you do or do not believe in God. But we do want you to believe in life. And that life and never taking the people in your life for granted, the gift of your health, the gift of where you live and the opportunities you have, and the gift and obligation to be creative And I love the way you say it. Our job, according to the Jewish tradition, is to improve the world. But we've sat together a while, and this is just me. I am so glad I have not yet heard Tikkun Olam come out of your voice, because Tikkun Olam is a misunderstanding of what the Jewish tradition is about.
Yeah.
It's not repairing a world that's been torn. It's improving a fabulous world that God made, but He didn't make it mitzuyan, and that's human beings' responsibility is to improve everything in the world, beginning with oneself. Okay. So for me...
We disagree about very little here, by the way.
Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Then maybe it's just the way we say it. Because I don't want people... This is what I'm afraid of. And you speak to this. You deal with congregants all the time. Right. Here's what I'm afraid of. The Jew who does believe in God, he believes in God.
Right.
And I don't need... There are so many at the moment, Jews who, to use a word that you used, and I think you were right, alienated. Not that there's an antipathy to Judaism. They certainly just don't think it's relevant. It means nothing to them.
Right.
And one of the reasons they do is they've been taught that religion means God. And that since at the moment the classical description of God has no relevance, no meaning to anybody who is about to study nuclear science. It's not most of us do not believe that the creation story is a factual account.
Sure.
It is a mashal. It is an allegory.
Sure.
When you say Adam ate from the tree of knowledge prematurely, I think you're wrong. This story was all about he had to eat from the tree of knowledge.
Sure.
He didn't belong in the Garden of Eden. Life doesn't begin until Adam and Eve emerge from the Garden of Eden. You know Wezel.
Sure.
This is Midrash. This isn't Golub.
Sure.
It's not Wolkoff. It's the essence of the Jewish tradition. But most Jews have been brought up with a very Christian view of what the story of the Garden of Eden is about, and they sinned by eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And if you ask most Jews, do you know why Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden? According to the Bible, the Torah. Do you know why? And their answer will be, well, they disobeyed God. Well, that's not what the Torah says.
That's not what it says, right.
The Torah says they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden so they wouldn't eat from the tree of life.
Life, right.
Because they ate from the tree they had to eat from. There was only one tree that was forbidden. It's the tree of life. You have to eat from the tree of knowledge. God knows they're going to eat from the tree of knowledge. God's waiting for them to eat from the tree of knowledge. And the question is not will they eat it or not, but when God says to them, did you eat from the tree? He doesn't say she made me do it,
right.
and she doesn't say the serpent made me do it. They both say, yeah, we did.
Yeah.
We're sorry. What can we do about it? Okay, that's the Jewish insight.
Okay, let me take a step back. First of all, I think that although there are people that believe in God, or would say that they believe in
Yes,
God.
my concern is you're not speaking to the
other
vast number of Jews I care about.
Okay.
And I want to show them that what they think Judaism is isn't Judaism at all. Or better said, there is a legitimate, authentic expression, theological, philosophical embrace of life in which there is a God, but it's a much less defined God.
Sure.
You said proof. The reason in my mind, it says in the Ten Commandments, you may never draw a picture of God. You may never depict God.
Right.
Not because you'll offend God, but when you draw God, it's a way of proving God. The Jewish tradition's insight is you can never prove God.
Right.
Even Moses, after 10 plagues, the Red Sea, and hearing the voice at Sinai, says to God, I want to see your face.
Right, and God says
and God
no.
says, you can't ever have proof. Can you live now I'm going to use a spiritual life without proof? Yes, you can.
Oh, sure you can. Sure
That's
you can.
what you're talking about.
Oh, sure you can.
And I want to say it in that way because I want everybody who's ever thought, if I don't believe in God, and this was the first question I was ever asked as a rabbi, a woman puts her hand up. I have the photograph. Mark, I don't believe in God. Can I be a Jew? Edith, of course you can.
Right.
The last thing you worry about is whether you believe in God. The first thing you worry about is all the things that Robert Wolkoff is saying, Shabbat, and the moral sensitivity to free the slave. And if you're lucky, the Jewish tradition says, I believe.
Well,
Sometime
all right,
before you die,
I'm not letting you
you'll
go on
get
that
to
one.
God.
I'm
You'll
not-
get,
I'm
if
not
you're
letting you go on that
lucky,
one.
if you're lucky,
I'm not letting you
you'll
go
get
on
to
that.
God. Okay,
No,
go ahead. Go at me.
So first of all, there are people that do believe in God or say that they believe in God, but that belief does not translate out into this powerful, driving, demanding force that would make their and the
Good
world's
for you.
life
Absolutely
different.
right. You're right.
So you don't get too many merit badges for believing in God, okay, number one. If you believe, then you act. And if you're not acting, then your belief is really almost trivial. All right. To the person that says either I don't believe or I don't know, right? That's why mythology, the mythic realm, is so powerful to me. Because I don't have to believe that there was a guy named Oedipus to know that there is a myth of Oedipus that is real and true and absolutely demanding in our lives. So I would look at that person and I wouldn't say, well, just do Shabbos, do this, do that other, and maybe eventually you'll get to God. I'd say you need to act right now as if there were one. You don't have to believe it. It's not, a litmus test about whether you can be Jewish or not. Of course you're Jewish. You are, you are. All right? And there are a lot of good reasons that it would be difficult to believe in God. Get on your quest. It's a mythic quest. This is what you're looking to find. Get with the program. Remember Heschel said, we are messengers who've forgotten the message. Part of that message is recognizing that we're messengers. For, I would say, a majority of the Jewish people today, the awareness of that is simply nowhere on the radar screen. People have no idea about that deeper sense of purpose. And that includes people that believe in God. That includes people that are orthopractic, that do a certain array of rituals. They don't necessarily know they have a message. I mean, we just heard about that one of the most sacred Christian places in Israel was firebombed it appears, by Jewish extremists. All right. You think they got the message? All right. And I'll bet every one of them, puts on tefillin every day, and every one of them davens, and they'll check the kosher certification of every place they go. But they clearly don't understand. All right? And whatever God means to them, it doesn't mean what's supposed to mean. All right? They're still living in their own little bigoted little world. All right? So you're absolutely right that we're not supposed to have an image of God. So our quest then, for me, is not, is there a God or not? The quest is, whatever image of God I have to be iconoclastic. I have to break that image to look for a more transcendent image. And that involves this constant energy, this constant turmoil of looking for more depth, looking for more understanding, letting the old idea die so that the new idea can rise. That requires a lot of activity. You have to be involved in that. You can't just do that for a couple of minutes. And if we have doubts, those doubts are not supposed to be, sort of condemned or rejected or denigrated, right? You just have to push that much harder. I would suggest to you the following, that however moral or socially active people are, believing in God and believing that God is demanding that, or believing that a God would demand that, if there were one, will bring them to greater heights than if somebody simply wanted to do the right thing and simply wanted to act in a moral fashion. Putnam came out with a book, the same guy that wrote Bowling Alone, came out with a book called American Grace. And what he pointed out is that on every social scale, with the one exception, people who are actively involved in a religious community act in a fashion that is more moral. The bell curve for religious people is shifted compared to people that are not involved in a religious organization. Right? Because
you just gave me an example of the opposite, with the bombing of the church.
Oh, sure. No, it's a bell curve. There are opposites. The one place where it didn't show up is on the tolerance scale. That's the one place where people that are associated with a religious group are weaker than people who are not
I don't know.
associated.
Religious people have done terrible, terrible things.
Sure. Not as
And-
bad as
and
non-religious people.
What?
Not as bad as non-religious
that's
people.
not
Look at
true.
the 20th century.
That's not
Look
true.
at the 20th century. The horrible massacres of the 20th century. Look, Hitler, Yamach Shemo, Stalin, Yamach
You
Shemo,
would not have
Mao
wanted to
Zedong,
live
Yamach
during the
Shemo.
Crusades.
No,
You
no,
would
of
not have
course.
wanted to live during the Inquisition.
Of course, they did horrible things, no question. Compared to
There are-
the mass murder, the
people who
bloodletting in the 20th century, who were all secular
All
people,
you're showing is
anti-religious
that
people?
in every generation there are bad people who do
Sure.
bad things. Some of them are religious, and they even use religion to justify
Of course,
their
yes,
evil.
of course.
And some are secular. And the reality is, people are people, and this notion that religious people are somehow intrinsically more moral, I don't find it empirically true. And again, I find it a very problematic message. I've spent so much of my life now doing this. And what is this? This is an attempt to educate and to inspire
Right.
and to engage. And one of the things we're doing all the time here, one of the reasons why I wanted you here is there are going to be people seeing you who are outside the Jewish community. There may be somebody who hears you, and because of you, they want to now, may want to find you personally, or they may want to find a rabbi like you. And for all I know, they'll hear you and they will begin a spiritual quest of their own, whatever that means for them.
Right.
Who are you or who am I to say what it should be? Just go.
Can't stand in judgment of it.
Right. But would I like there to be more Shabbat in people's homes? I would.
Sure.
Would I like there to be more Sukkot in American Jewish homes? Yes, I would. Would I like Jews to even know what Shavuot is? Yes, I would.
Right.
But it's not because I believe there's a God in heaven who will be happy or happier if Jews are celebrating Shabbat. I believe that in some way there is a holiness in the universe, and that the image of the angels going to every home and seeing are the candles lit, and you get a blessing. If they're not, they go off and they're weeping. Well, I want that messianic day when in every Jewish home there will be a kiddush said. Okay,
Amen.
that I love it. I'm saying that all the time to this audience, and I also say you act as if there's a God, even if you don't believe there's a God. And what I do think is that people who are good, no matter how good they are, if they understand that they can be part of a community, this Jewish people you talk about, no matter how good they are, they'll be better.
They'll be better, absolutely.
Because it's by rubbing up against you that I become better. And you know that. And what you and I are trying to do is create communities where the loveliest of people get together because it makes every one of us lovelier.
Sure.
We have a slight difference of emphasis.
Yeah.
It's really more of an emphasis than a profound disagreement. And I want you to continue your rabbinic perspective exactly as it is. I'm only saying to you, I have a slightly different worry. And my worry is for the Jew, and I know them. And by the way, you and I are East Coast kids. There's a Midwest and a West Coast of Jewish life,
Right.
which most East Coast rabbis and educators
Have no idea about.
They don't have a clue
Right.
what it is to live in Seattle as a Jew or Portland as a Jew. They have no clue what it is to live in New Mexico
Right.
as a Jew. And when you talk about all the things that are exciting to you about Jewish life today, they're very East Coast centered. And the reality is you go outside, you're living in a different world.
Sure.
And one of the nice things about television, and now we're all over the country.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
But
great thing.
I do want to respect the fact that there are Jews who are struggling all over. And in general, I give them a credit for wanting to be involved at all, but I don't believe for most of them the notion of God as the Jewish tradition means it drives them. And all I want to say is the following. I believe you and I do disagree on one aspect of the Jewish tradition. You act as if you believe in God, yes, because you'll take it more seriously. Although many Jews who, as you say, tell me they believe in God, they don't act seriously
Right.
at all.
Right.
But what I want you to understand, there's a Jewish tradition that really believes there is a God in heaven. God is not a person. God does not have a body. God doesn't think like we do. God is other. God is this ultimate mystery. What is God? We don't know.
Yeah.
Is God there? We sort of feel God is, and we'll act as if God is.
Right.
And in the meantime, yes, you should be as caring and lovely a human being and ethical and concerned with all the things that you articulate so beautifully. And I'll say it again, if someday you are more sure, never positive of God, then good for you. And the question is, how do you live your life when you're not sure? And most people who are watching you right now, most people I meet all the time, even if they tell me they believe in God, they don't mean it. Because they don't believe in a God who is involved the way the word God means. And I want a place for them to know they can be authentic, committed, involved, day-to-day involved Jews that you and I want, whether they believe in an active God. Do I believe there's a God in heaven and there are two people in bed side by side? One has somebody praying for them and one doesn't. God will take care of the one who has somebody praying for him and won't for the guy in the next bed because there's nobody. Are you kidding? You think that's what Judaism is?
You can make it even tougher. You know, when you hear people, Holocaust survivors, talk about, you know, I survived, it was a miracle. Now, if you want to take that language seriously, so God did a miracle for you, and not for everybody else. He didn't do a miracle.
I understand.
But let me say this. There was Mark, that Harold Bloom once made the comment, the great literary critic, once made the comment that God is the most fascinating character in all of world literature.
Good for him.
That when you think about the complexity of this character called God,
Yes.
it is endlessly fascinating. I mean, not
Does it
even
offend,
Shakespeare.
Does it offend you
No.
to call God a character?
No, to the contrary. No, I
agree with you. But you see, that to me, when I read the Torah, and I teach this, the Torah is not a newspaper account.
Of course not.
Okay. It is every single narrative is another
Story.
mashal, right?
It's a story.
And in the Torah, God is a character in a morality play.
Right.
That doesn't mean there is a God or is not a God. The fact that I say God is a character in a morality play doesn't mean I don't think that I'm saying there is no God.
Right.
But the Jewish tradition never thought that the God described in those stories, in those narratives, is what God really is.
Well, think about Maimonides when he talks about the different different
Yes,
levels,
yes.
and when he, you know, the idea that somebody would look at the Torah as if it's this sort of catechism.
Yes.
He would look at it and he would consider it grotesque. You guys are like outside the palace. You can't even find the door. All right, he was that dismissive of people that just would take it with that only literal level. All right, so. You know, we can talk about God as a character, or the words that I use about the myth of Judaism, all right, and entering the mythic realm, all right. But for me, myths are much greater truths. You know, that's where the real truth lies.
Absolutely right.
I had a fascinating incident. I was doing a scholar in residence gig out in Wisconsin, and there was somebody who's teaching with me, a wonderful, Karen Black, her name was, a wonderful storyteller. And she told this incredibly elaborate story about her mother-in-law and her mother-in-law being in Florida and a caregiver who wasn't, struggling to find a caregiver, and her mother-in-law weakening over the course of time, and the travails that the family went through. It was by the time she finished, everybody had a tear in their eye. Right? And later on that day, we had a session about archaeology, the truth of the Bible, and so forth. And I said, you know, I just want to point something out. We all heard that story pardon me, it was Judith Black, not Karen Black, Judith Black. We all heard that story that Judith told, all right? Are you aware of the fact that that story might have been entirely false in terms of, we don't know whether this woman is really married. We don't know if this mother-in-law ever really existed. She could have made this whole thing up. But the reason you all had a tear in your eyes because even though the story may be entirely false, you know that it's entirely true.
Good for you.
Okay? Well,
Good for you.
the world created in 7 days? Sure. It's entirely false, but it's entirely true.
Yes.
And that's what I want people to come in, not because they got the God merit badge, but because they want to participate in this world of the myth.
Yes, but when you say it that way, you open up possibilities for so many people who thought that Judaism was very simplistic and childish and closed.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, Robert Wolkoff gives them a view of the Jewish tradition that is as exciting as nuclear physics is to the nuclear physics person.
Right. Sure.
And kol hakavod to you. And I'm assuming, therefore, if I were listening to you Shabbat after Shabbat, I would learn this in your congregation, yes?
Not as much as I wish, but yes.
Why
yes,
not as
I
much
do
as you
talk
wish?
about it. I certainly talk about God, and I certainly
You
talk
didn't
about...
talk about God just now.
I understand, but I certainly talk
You
about...
talked about the myth.
Right.
And how the myth, even though
All
it's a
the time.
myth, is true.
Right. All
Robert,
the time.
that is such a crucial message.
Right. I live in the world of gematria. I mean, I do things like that. All right. But what I find, and this goes back to your question about the status of American Jewry, is that as much as I would like to put an emphasis on that world of spiritual quest, because of the craziness about Israel, because of BDS, because of J Street, because of those concerns, I find myself forced back into teaching courses about anti-Semitism and Israel's War of Independence and so forth. That I thought during the 90s, that was to me sort of almost Mashiach Zeit, right? That we can, okay, we're all saved, we got that done, now let's study.
Everybody learns from you, and I've had the extraordinary opportunity to learn from you today and to make sure that our audience gets to learn from you. I've heard wonderful, wonderful things about you, almost like if not higher. They didn't go far enough. I hope you'll come back and we'll talk about many. I have a whole sheaf of other things I want to talk to you about.
Pleasure.
So you are always welcome here.
And again, thank you for your work. I so appreciate it.
Thank you. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha. You're the best.
Thank you.
Fabulous. What fabulous. Robert Wolkoff, Rabbi of the Conservative Synagogue of North Brunswick, New Jersey, congregation B'nai Tikvah. You're hearing one of the truly outstanding rabbinic lights on the American Jewish scene, and everything he has to say, you don't have to agree with any particular, but you walk away and you understand more about what it means to be a Jew, engaged with Israel, and a mensch. Kol hakavod to you. Just fabulous. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you have to anything you've heard on this edition of L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post on my Facebook page, or tweet me. I really hope to hear from many of you. My thanks to Dr. Naomi Vilko for her help with this edition of L'chaim, and Naomi is doing some fabulous work on behalf of Israel and the Jewish world. Well done, Naomi. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to JEM, To Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.